Hi everyone, welcome to Mentoring Developers. This is a YouTube channel for you. If you are a new developer or you want to get into this software development thing and you don't know how to get started, this is the right place for you. Here we have again, Kevin Mack. Kevin, how are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah,
and
good
this
to
time
have you
on video.
back.
So
Absolutely. And we can talk about all the cool stuff that all the cool kids are talking about. And if you're somebody out there who's new and who's like, I don't know if I know what to do. There are thousands of things to choose from. What do I do? Tell me one thing, Kevin. Tell me one thing that I can do. So there are a few things that you are excited about these days. Let's talk about those things. And in the next episode, we're going to focus in on one of them. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. All right, Kevin.
yeah.
What is exciting you these days?
Well, this has been kind of an odd week. So I, of course, have a full-time job in a company that I run, but then I also work on side projects, and then I mentor and advise different startups, especially in the early stages, and then help people in their, getting their career started. This week, I've touched on so many different types of technology. I was working in WordPress. I was working in PhoneGap. I was working in React.js, custom application development, and just pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then I was also working in Shopify. And then with all those things, there's various languages that are integrated inside those that have to come into play. So when I'm looking at something like Shopify or WordPress, well, WordPress is written in PHP, but then Shopify is written in their own proprietary language called Liquid, but it's really derived directly from PHP and then from their libraries that compiles the CSS. It's really a SAS-based precompiled CSS language. And then, as I said, WordPress, PHP, so a lot of WordPress right there. But then majority of my day-to-day life is actually working in React.js as well as Rails, so Ruby. And from a database standpoint, then focusing in Postgres. So I could list off even more technologies that I just touched in the past 7 days. That's kind of like the snippet of it. And when I look at like what's actually popular in the market today, what jobs are kind of hiring, I know a lot of companies, at least here in Columbus, Ohio, and I see job postings across the entire country. What's been really, really popular is the continuous growth and really adoption of React.js. And I think one of the big reasons why that language has become so popular is because when it came out, it was kind of ahead of the curve because it was focusing on the actual standards of JavaScript. So with that, there's JavaScript, but that's actually ECMAScript. And so ECMAScript's the actual language of JavaScript. And ever since what's referred to as like ECMAScript 6, it's kind of stabilized and the language has become a more robust, dynamic language that you can build back-end things like Node in. So where I'm going with that is React.js was kind of ahead of the curve. And at the same time period where React.js was coming to market and it was put out by Facebook, there were other popular MV star frameworks. When I mean MV star, that stands for really this derive off of model view controller and like how backend languages are built. So like Rails is an MVC framework. .NET MVC is an MVC framework, but MV Star were the JavaScript languages that were built purely in JavaScript that had their own syntax. And then they brought in the core language of JavaScript, but then you would implement it with an MVC framework on the back end. React was a pure MV Star because it kind of separated out the model as well as the view inside there. But it was super powerful and fast. You had to know JavaScript really, really well. So anytime that you start learning React.js, you're actually doing a deep dive into the modern versions of ECMAScript or JavaScript. So that's been really, really popular and it's grown in popularity. Other things from the JavaScript perspective, kind of similar, is Vue.js. And I kind of look at that. Oh, there was a language. Help me remember this. It was pushed by Microsoft a lot and Microsoft MVC. I'm going to call it like Hammer JS or something like that. But
I
it was
don't
like
think so.
it
No, I
was
wouldn't
about
know.
it was about like 8 years ago. But there
Okay.
was one that was very much pushed, and I feel like Vue.js is that new version of it. It's really powerful if you need just a JavaScript guidelines to do like a button click or an interaction, but you can build out really robust JavaScript interactions and applications using Vue.js. So kind of summarizing that from a hiring or job perspective, lots of jobs out there are looking for React.js developers. And then a requirement that's coming into play is knowing Vue.js. And at the bottom of all that is just becoming familiar, or actually not becoming familiar, but understanding and knowing about JavaScript. And when I say JavaScript, it's not things like jQuery that are written on top of JavaScript. It's not just learning Angular. It's not just learning Vue. It's not just learning React.js, but it's actually learning the language itself. There's a bunch of great sources out there, but really it's just learning ECMA and ECMA 6 and above, and that's becoming the requirement. And if you learn that, you can learn all these other languages. I know
Yeah,
I'm talking a lot, so let's try to make this a little bit more of a conversation,
yeah,
especially because we're
there's
on
a lot
video
of
here.
things. If you just start
Yeah,
counting, JavaScript framework number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
yeah,
If you did that for 10 minutes, we will exhaust our 10 minutes, but we won't run out of JavaScript frameworks. So if you're somebody who's just starting out, it's so confusing, right? Because you can't learn everything. But the key here is, from getting from you, is that you didn't restrict yourself to one thing. Now, Ruby on Rails, it's a thing on its own. It's an ecosystem on its own without any JavaScript framework, without any other technology mixed in. That's a big thing to learn. And it is used in a lot of startups and a lot of companies. We know that. React.js on its own, it doesn't stand on its own. It needs some kind of backend, but it's a way to build good user interactions, right? Immersive user interactions that feel cohesive, and it's not like you load a page and then you click a button and then something happens and then you see. So it's more kind of interactive. You get this feeling, but React is one type of that framework. We call it SPA framework or single page applications. There are others, and I've used so many, right, in the past. We used Angular. That's was pretty big at one point.
yep.
Then for me, there was a time I was evaluating those Ember versus Angular, and I really liked Ember. So because
Yeah. Ember's a headache to think about nowadays. So, but
it's so
it's still
much.
widely used. It's
it, it
crazy.
is it is widely used, but in a very small sliver of the industry, and it's who there are people who use it and they love it. I know that Netflix uses it. I know that so many companies on the West Coast use it. And, I went to EmberConf a few years ago, and you can see the excitement. It was great, but it's moving at a breakneck pace. Every 6 weeks, they have a new release with new features, completely upending everything. And but you can see the trajectory, like they're moving in this direction. And if you're careful, if you notice, they're following whatever React is doing. So they see React doing something and then they follow, because what happens is trailblazers like React or some other framework that will come in the future, they find a problem that's kind of a pain, right? And they solve it, and everybody sees it. So you either insist, no, my way is the right way, or you adapt. A lot of times, I think we're seeing some convergence. Server side rendering, for example, that's a big thing now. Didn't
Hmm.
used to be. And so many things for performance. And then now you have this problem of, if you render everything on the client, or everything on the client, right? And the search engine doesn't necessarily know, because it's just running JavaScript. There's no static HTML that's coming down from server. So then you have a search engine optimization problem. These are all advanced things. If you're starting out, don't worry about any of this. But you don't try to learn everything all at once. You're gonna struggle.
Well,
But
I
right,
would just say the summary of all that is the core of all these libraries. If you learn JavaScript in actual JavaScript, that's the foundation of all of like Ember versus Angular versus React.js. Now, Angular kind of pushes you down to their language and utilize it, but it doesn't mean you can't be building in traditional JavaScript inside the experience. And React.js, you can write an entire application that's 100% just pure JavaScript, but React.js kind of aids in that. Same thing with Vue. So it makes some of those complex things, as you were talking about, a little bit easier to do. But if you're working in a React.js project and you've never worked in React.js before, but you've become a wizard of JavaScript, you can pick it up very, very quickly.
Right. Because conceptually, I feel, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel that we are converging, the industry is converging towards good ideas, and we're learning, okay, what's good and what's not in every framework and every future framework that will come out in the future. They will implement it in a different way. But I think we're adapting. You can see Angular a little bit, moving towards what Ember was doing. They have a CLI now that didn't used to have this system where you could generate code that is sort of conformant. One thing looks like the other thing. Everything is not just completely brand new. So I feel that you're absolutely right. If learning JavaScript or the modern version of JavaScript, you're calling it ECMAScript 6. Officially, it's ECMAScript 2015 and then 2016 and 2017. And that's where the confusion is. So what the standardization committee is like, every year we're going to do a new version and it's going to be named by the year that was released. Okay. But the rest of the world still called it ES6. So now we have this confusion. A new person would be like, I don't know what this is. And the fact is that when it was released, browsers didn't support it. So then you had this problem of the browsers haven't really done it properly. Now, most of those browsers now support ES6 and the ES7, if you want to call that. But if you don't, there are tools out there. Look up Babel.js. If you wanted to do something that you're not sure if it's supported, if you're working in an environment where there's an old version of Internet Explorer, you can still make it work.
Can I add one thing on that? Like,
sure.
Babel is a lifesaver. So what Babel does is, if you're writing an application or anything in modern day JavaScript, it has the fallback for every previous version of ECMAScript, so JavaScript. So even if I'm writing something in the latest and greatest, it will fall back and compile it out so those older browsers like your IE 10 or 11 can still use it. They even have fallback all the way back to IE 9, and then you add something like a polyfill, which then adds support for different things. I know one of the biggest ones is like an assign that always comes up when you're even using Babel. But there's these things that are out there that you write in the latest and greatest JavaScript. It compiles down to the old versions, similar like how you would write Sass and then it compiles out the CSS.
Right.
But the benefit of these are you're writing code for today and the future, but then you're supporting for the past for those legacy browsers and users. And then if there's not something in there, there's what's referred to as a polyfill, meaning that a technology that can't just be like rewritten to an older browser, that it means like that native capability doesn't exist. Like background filter is a great example of this. I came across this in CSS today or this week. And what it does is it acts as the filter property, but on a background image, meaning that you can use the same CSS filter properties and values for it, but you can do like a blur background, similar to like that Apple look where you have, some kind of like block on a background. The background's in full, focus, but then this div that's on top of it is blurring the background, and then you have text there. It's one of the coolest things. That doesn't exist in IE 10 and 11, but guess what? There's a polyfill for it, and it falls back to it. And JavaScript and both CSS have those things. Now, you want to use them cautiously, but it's just this idea that you could be writing for today and the future and then fall back to the past. Like Babel, such a great point and a great thing to bring up.
Right.
It's huge.
Right. If you were watching this in 2020, which you couldn't watch earlier because it was recorded in 2020, or anytime in the future, you can actually go to the latest version of ECMAScript and start using it, because this is called transpiling. We have those available. You should always be learning the new features and then have it converted into what's supported, and then kind of learn both. I think it's a very good idea. Yeah, there's so much to talk about with polyfills. I've had to use a lot of polyfills in some of the projects that I've done, because it's very, very old browsers, but it works. And I have to mention the Mozilla Developer Network MDN website has been a lifesaver. Every time I know I need to look for a polyfill, if I want to look at an API, I go there and I search for whatever I want, and they will have a description of the feature, what it does, some examples, and on the side, in the sidebar, they have polyfills. So I picked up lots of polyfills from there. So
Yeah, all amazing points. But I guess going back to the initial discussion, I did my classic, we were going this way and we went that way. Just technologies today, like React.js is huge, as we were saying, but it's really all about JavaScript. JavaScript is huge. Everyone's hiring for it, but it's not necessarily, and I'm actually really happy to hear like there's college courses that are teaching modern day JavaScript. So I know for many, many years, the JavaScript that they taught you in school was more like the document, get element by ID, and it wasn't using things like the modern day query selector and query selector all and all these different things that are out there. And like that's just one foundational thing. But a lot of the JavaScript was always like an alert box and it popped up a window. And it was like, that means JavaScript. It's like there's a lot more for it because entire websites, entire applications, both on hardware and in the browser, are written in JavaScript today. It's huge. So that's a huge one to learn. And I think alternatively is, constantly looking at MVC frameworks. If you enjoy .NET, get into .NET MVC. There's been some major changes that Microsoft has done in their MVC framework. And I'm blanking on that. What's the version of .NET MVC that you can work on both a Mac and a Windows?
Okay, that's a very good question. It's not the version of .NET MVC, but it's a version of .NET. So what happened with .NET is that they used to be focused on Windows only. Then there's this other company that started an open source project to port it to Linux. Then Microsoft bought that company. Okay, long story short, now we have .NET, which is distilled down to its, the smallest parts. That core,
that's what it is,
called .NET Core.
Yeah,
that .NET Core has been done from the beginning. Now it's anything .NET, and it's not just the MVC. It's anything in .NET, which is a huge ecosystem. Now you can take it and you can run it everywhere because they're building it like Node. Basically, you can construct it using these parts. And if you're on Windows, you can add, you can do the same thing. And it wasn't supported. So the problem is I work in .NET mostly, right, these days. And so I know this quite well. I've been recently involved in some large projects where we were trying to convert, from one framework to another. So it happens a lot. So if you are somebody who is able to find a job in .NET and you feel like, I really don't want to work in Windows, I want to work on a Mac, you can do that now. And the fact is, many companies are not doing that. If they are a Mac shop or if they are a Linux shop, they're not using .NET. But if for whatever reason they wanted to, they could. Right now you have support, and it's a crazy thing. If you have a Windows application that is supposed to run only on Windows because it depends on Windows, a Windows native program, you could actually turn that into a sort of multi-platform thing. Yep. So that, just a note. So there's .NET. There's this whole ecosystem. Usually if you're in .NET, you're in .NET. If there's a company that's using .NET, okay. If it's a web app, you use the ASP.NET MVC framework. Okay. If it's an application that's going to only run on this desktop, you can have what's called Windows Forms, or you can have something else. Nightmares.
I just love it because you're a Microsoft guy. I know the ins and outs of it, and I can even remember .NET Core.
Why should you?
I say that I've done my my time in .NET. So I spent
Yeah, you
probably
did.
about 6 8 years doing it, and I feel like I could finally say like I earned that badge and moved on to
Moving
other
on.
frameworks.
Been
Yeah,
there, done that. It's
yeah.
nothing to
But
see here, folks.
it really is powerful, and I think that is the limitation that people have had because and thanks for correcting me on that on the just .NET MVC side. With .NET Core and VS Code, they've also made it really easy for you to create an instance locally on your machine. Where before to open up a port, the whole IIS set up in a Windows machine and to have .NET running and then to run your first application could take you hours to do. But now with like VS Code and some of the tools that have come out from Microsoft, and not to mention like Visual Studios at one point, and there's still a paid version of it for like enterprise, but there was a paid version of it that was like thousands of dollars where you couldn't even do development in Microsoft without spending a lot of money. And then
Hmm.
a few years later, they came out with a free version of Visual Studio. I think it was called Visual Studio Free. But then they did this complete
Community.
rewrite around like that acquisition. Like Xamarin was tied in there, and then they made this VS Code, which I was a hardcore like I would fight someone like to death over like Sublime Text 2 was the number one text
Right.
editor that existed out there. And when people were telling me to use VS Code, I was like, no. And like on some of like the dev boards, I was getting angry. It was like tapping spaces. And then I tried it and I was like, this is the best like
It's so
I've
good.
ever used. Yeah, and but with that, like Microsoft's also put out all these different programs to literally in a few clicks for free, you can run a .NET application and learn and do it. And other languages aren't necessarily like that. Like to do Ruby development, which Rails is based on. If you're using a Mac, you have Ruby installed. You still have to install Rails. Takes a few seconds. But then it's like, which text editor do I use? I still use Visual VS Code for that, so Visual Studio Code. But I have to add a plugin to do that. If I use JetBrains Ruby, it makes it a little bit easier. But that costs, I think, there's a cost to it. It's relatively expensive. Great
Right.
editor IDE, but when it comes to like spinning up, if you're a .NET, you went to school for it, like Microsoft has the tools out there to try to learn it, and those are hot. Like those are hot jobs like anywhere. A lot of the enterprise corporate companies are still hiring and looking for .NET developers today.
Right. Well, I think that's where you can um, mark a line on. Oh, what is that message on my video? Do you see something?
Yeah, it looks like it's saying that we've reached our maximum video. I think this video was too awesome.
That's too awesome. Well, I don't even know if this is being recorded anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably because I probably finished. Well, that's great. Nice seeing you, Kevin.
No,
So
I mean I think we can if the video got cut off, we can just put an overlay on top of it.
yeah,
Uh, but I think it's actually coming from your camcorder.
right. It's possible because this is a new setup. I'm using my
Yeah.
DSLR, and there's a little memory card. Maybe it's trying to save it there. We'll figure it out. If we don't have a picture, well, if you don't have video, if we get cut off, we'll put some cats fighting or something interesting that people
Yeah,
can
to
so
like
people keep listening
robots like punching it out.
to.
I mean, so like JavaScript first and MVC framework. So Rails is the other one outside of .NET and learning it. When it comes to the MVStar, JavaScript framework, so like your Angulars, your Embers, your React JS, your even Views, if you want to do something in that space, your .NET MVC, your Ruby on Rails setup, any of these things, the best thing to do is just create the classic like hello world example, which is an application that gets up there, and then build something like don't kind of like vision what you want the experience to be. Don't be like, let me develop this and build upon it. Like, give yourself some kind of hardcore requirements for it. Like, go out there, find a website, and be like, I'm going to recreate this website and try to figure out the best ways of doing it, or I'm going to see this application that's out there and rebuild it. This is what you naturally do is if you're like building and sitting there in this vacuum of like, I'm going to build a website, it's going to have all these pages, you'll find yourself learning all these things, but the requirements you're writing happen as you're developing. So you're not really putting forward a challenge to yourself. You're learning the language and you're getting experience with it, but you don't see some kind of like hard interaction that you have to like see as a mountain that you need to climb. And that's why I recommend like finding something out there and trying to replicate it, especially when it comes to these MVC frameworks or an application that you're building out. And then I think that really the last and third thing is platform. You know, and a lot of times I criticize being a platform-based developer, and there's extremes on that. Like .NET, it can also be a great example of this. This is why I like to make fun of .NET at times. But the old versions of Visual Studio, you know, you didn't have to know .NET to build a .NET application. If you knew Visual Studio very well, you could build something. Now, it wasn't necessarily the best application, but you could do that. And the same thing with Xcode. If you just use, which is how you build iOS apps, if you just use storyboards, you can build a fully functional iOS application without knowing any Objective-C or
Swift.
Or Swift. You know, so with that, yes, you can do it, but you only know the platform itself. Now, however, if you're a developer and you're learning development and you get involved with a platform, and let's say even a platform, we'll include something like a WordPress, which are, you know, it's, I think, the number one framework for building websites.
Yeah.
And it came out just to build out journals around the time period of like live journals.
Right.
But it's now been turned on its side to become a content management system or a CMS for websites. And it's great to get experience with, because there's so many websites out there. Everyone's looking for a WordPress developer. It's relatively easy to learn. PHP is a great language. The nice thing about it is it's live, so it doesn't have to compile. You're building it out and you're seeing it fresh on your screen. You can run an instance on your computer. You can get a WordPress up and running within a few minutes. Like for Web Group, we did a WordPress 101. It's probably about like 6 years ago. Eric Katz did it. And it's about a 3-hour long video, but the first 20 minutes of it is really all you need to know, because he talks to you about creating your first WordPress instance and installing it on your machine. And then from there, it goes into the details and goes into like the PHP side. So, you know, WordPress, great platform. Shopify, again, it's kind of derived from PHP. There aren't enough developers in the world to handle the demand of what is needed for the e-commerce world, especially with everything going on with COVID. It is an amazing platform. It is one of my favorite platforms to work in, and it's easy to learn. There's many ways and different architectural approaches that can go and come into play, but I highly recommend any developer that's still trying to figure out what they want to do or has dabbled with PHP, or even if you haven't, go to Shopify, sign up. You can create a free account for 14 days. End of day, you may find yourself like, maybe I'm not a developer, but I'm going to open up my own store and start selling. It's really easy.
My own
like
e-commerce store.
Yeah.
No, that's good. Look, I know people who are using Shopify. I've been using it for years, and we know that Shopify as a company is huge. It's become so huge. It's kind of sort of competing with Amazon, the e-commerce side of it. Mm-hmm. But Shopify is a platform, something that I discovered a few years ago when I saw people just jumping just full on and building sort of these kind of add-ons for Shopify. And I still don't understand how that works. I mean, generally, for my personal interest, I would love to be able to have a little business where I could conceive a product and help somebody, and in the process make some money. That would be a great thing for anybody starting out or more experienced. But especially if you live in a place where it's hard to find a job, okay, build something. People use it, they like it, they'll pay you.
Yep.
And they probably have, I'm assuming there's some kind of an app store or something where you
Yep.
could build something for Shopify. No, but there's that, and there's custom development where someone needs a store and they just want a custom version of it. They don't want to use a built-in template. So what are you advocating exactly? Where is the money here? Is
Yeah.
it offering yourself as a Shopify consultant where you can build a Shopify site for somebody, or are you advocating people go into building some add-ons or some reusable thing that people can use?
Yeah. So it's really all the above to develop and create custom themes inside there. And then there's also the lighter side of it, and this is similar to like Squarespace, another platform. So a lot of people may need a website, but they don't need a fully custom website. They just want to find a theme that's out there. So first is both in the Shopify, Squarespace, or Wix world is becoming familiar with which themes are available out there, and then listening to what the websites or the customers' demands are for this website, using those as requirements, and then selecting the right theme for it. But then there's two different levels of customization inside there. Is picking out the theme and then going in there, and sometimes it's just changing hex values or the font family. But you don't have to necessarily be a hardcore developer to do that, or a developer at all. You just have to know
Yeah,
what hex values are, RGBA, and those
right.
certain things. And a lot of that's copy and paste. But the idea of knowing how to update those inside there and how they'll cascade through is its own skill set, is becoming familiar with those platforms. And they're like, all right, I have a Shopify store. I need to add stores. It's a non-technical person. You're like, well,
Right.
we're going to go, what's your budget? Okay, you're in the world of, let's pick a theme. Let's pick a theme. Let's customize it to your brand. And then I'm going to add all the products for you. And then I'm going to train you on the CMS side of Shopify. That's its own job. And then
Right.
there's the other layer of customization, building your own custom themes inside there. And then there's the last, which you said is their app or their marketplace. And there's people that, as an entrepreneur, as a developer, as someone that is creative, you're always like, I'm going to disrupt an entire industry. I want to make a lot of money doing that. It's like, all right, that's very difficult to do. You can create an app in Shopify that is installed in hundreds of thousands of stores, and you're collecting $15 a month from each of these stores. You can literally be making more money by creating a custom app in Shopify than you would ever have by having industry shakedown, change the entire universe and world. And it could be something that you do on the side, which is absolutely crazy. The apps, like, these are things that someone that works in Shopify, I'm like, oh, I need the store to do this. Well, the timeline and the budget's very short. There's something that's out there that does it and does it really, really well. Well, if we were to build this out, it would cost X amount of development hours and dollars. We could just use this and pay them $40 a month. And that $40 a month is less than us doing this development work for 20 times the cost of that. So it's like you could either pay 30 grand to build this custom functionality, or we can use this service and application that costs us $40 a month. Well, let's go with the $40 a month, and maybe someday we'll build that out custom. Well, you kind of move on and you move on to other priorities because that serves us. And that $40 a month is, again, less money than doing the work there. But then the person that made that $40 a month is making $40 a month every single month, reoccurring. And then there's multiple of you, multiple instances of it installed. These people make crazy amount of money doing that. And the development for it's super fun, and it's not that challenging to do. You just have to get approved as a vendor, as a Shopify partner, though.
Yeah. So there are lots of opportunities. Obviously, someone who's more interested in sort of mobile app development, you could potentially do an Apple app, iOS app, or an Android app. There are opportunities everywhere. There's so many things to talk about. I think we're gonna have to have a separate episode just to dig into Shopify, because there's this
Yeah.
great opportunity in 2020 that, in because of the pandemic and all the other things that are happening. This is kind of pretty hot right now, and well, let's talk more about this. But overall, if you talk about what are the possibilities right now, let's just wrap it up. So we have these corporate developers, the corporate world. If you work at a big Fortune 500 company or a large company with big customers, or companies with millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in revenue, what they have is either they adopt .NET, the Microsoft side of things, or Java, or both. Usually that's where the companies lie. Some companies, there are teams that work on other open source things like Ruby on Rails. I've seen that. And then because everybody wants to be modern, they might want to have a single page application framework just sort of added on. You're not going to find companies that are very large that are very, very, very hyper focused on those, but there's some work there. And a lot of times I've seen these days Angular and React is coming up as an option, but React really works well with other open source, or at least the developers, they kind of think alike. But Angular is sort of universal. You can find that in the .NET world just as well. And then in the very small sliver, you have Ember. You also have Vue and whatever else that I don't remember right now. Those are faster. Those are little variations on React. That's on one side. Then you have mobile app development. Mobile app development, you have the Apple App Store, Objective-C and Swift. Then you have Java for the Android App Store. Then you have these other platforms that compile into a mobile platform. There's so many to choose from. My recommendation, obviously, is React Native, because then you can do a little bit of React, and then you add a library for React Native. Now you have mobile apps and web app experience. So that goes together. And then you have other things. Those are not
Yeah.
necessarily programming, as you said, but you could get into, if you become a Shopify expert, and I need a Shopify expert today because I want to open a store, or I have a problem that I need to solve today because tomorrow I'm expecting a big, $100,000 orders coming in, and I don't want to mess it up. Will I be willing to pay you $20,000 to fix it in one day? Now, you don't need to be a programmer to do that. You just need to know how to solve that problem, right? As you said. So if you know a platform, there's so much value in that. But if you sell your services on an hourly basis, in my opinion, and it's something that takes you half an hour to do, it's very valuable. You can't put a dollar amount on the time here, but you can do that for the outcomes. You can say, I'm going to solve this problem for you. This is my service. I'll charge $1,000, and it may take you half an hour. So your effective hourly rate is very high, but that's something that you have to think about. But you have to become an expert first. And I feel like if you are an expert, then things open up for you. And that's something for me to look for as well, because I would like to be an expert on something. Right now, I got to tell you, I am a jack of all trades. I can't really say I'm really, really good into this technology so deep that I know everything about it, or I know better than 90% of other people. I don't. And I can't say anything about a particular industry or domain. I can't say that I know everything about e-commerce. And I think that's where I am missing out personally, right? I get excited about this, I get excited about that. But if you become an expert, my personal opinion after all the years of toil, that if you become an expert, you become a lot more valuable, and then you have the options open up for you. You can get paid more for doing the same type of work because you can do it better, and you're an authority, and people believe what you say, or you can start your own thing. I think this is all exciting. This landscape, as depressing as it is in 2020, all that's going around us. This part is exciting, where you can be at home. You can stay at home. You can stay in whatever feels comfortable for you. But all these avenues, not only they're still available, they've expanded because now you have to be remote. And I find that, for instance, traveling used to be a big part of my job or other people's jobs. And if I'm in a certain geographic location, if I'm in this city, that used to be an advantage. But it's no more. So if you live in a very small town somewhere, or a different country even, you have the same opportunity as me or somebody else. So This is exciting.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, in all that, you said something and it made me think of, learning all these things and kind of a laundry list of different things. One simple thing that I would also recommend after listening to this, if you're not familiar with like terminal and command line, that is something that's huge in the development world. And I feel like it takes some developers too many years before they get comfortable in it. And I would say from day one, similar to like learning the core languages like JavaScript and maybe dabbling in an MVC framework and trying to find the right platform that really piques your interest. And that's why we were talking about these things is like find, Shopify may be interesting to you or, WordPress may be very exciting to you and you find passion in it. But when it all comes down to it, it's like there's some foundational things like terminal that no matter what language you're using, you use your terminal window. Same thing with like repositories, like you learning Git and knowing Git, the ins and outs, becoming familiar with Git flow and all these different things. So a lot of times like we get into these conversations, it's about like the technology, the experience, the architecture, but the day zero pieces that you need are the foundational, and you'll learn a lot in a job or throughout your career. But a lot of times people forget about some of those basic things like terminal. Like I always forget that people don't know terminal. It's like, hey, open this up, put this command, and they're like, what? Where? How do I do that? Like
yeah.
yeah, Rails console into that. It's like, where do I do that? How do I get into that? So it's like those foundational things that I think are sometimes overlooked, from an educational standpoint, but then in conversations like this.
Yeah. Because we don't emphasize that in our educational institutes. Also, if you are a Windows developer, a .NET developer, then you probably started from Visual Studio, which traditionally didn't have a console built in. And the idea of typing commands, it seems foreign. You like the integrated development environment. It's fun to have, but it just limits you so much because you don't know. So now the new .NET Core, another ad for .NET Core here, is that the new .NET Core is built on top of all of these command line utilities. So they build those first, and then they build the IDEs on top of that use them. So it's the same experience whether you type it in or not. And now, if you're in Windows, you should use PowerShell. If you are in Mac, you can use iTerm, which is a pretty good terminal, right? So you should be able to open it and type commands in now, even if you're doing .NET, as cursed as it is.
Yeah. Well,
it is a curse.
Yeah.
I have had the curse of .NET for many years.
Yeah, that's where I feel like there are a large group of developers I'm friends with that that got their career started using Visual Studio and .NET and never got familiar with the actual development languages in like terminal. Yes. I have a developer on our team that never even really opens up a browser when he's developing. He does it all 100% in terminal, like his editor and terminal to see the results. Like he doesn't care about the views of it because he's a back-end developer. And he's like in there.
For real? He's looking at the raw HTML. I'm like, what is this? It's a human HTML parser.
And like he's amazing in it. And the terminal talk on this, like we've decided to rewatch Mr. Robot, and Lena had never seen that, and I'm a huge fan of that director, Sam Esmail. Fantastic show, Mr. Robot. But in one of the episodes, he's like hacking the FBI. And anytime I'm on my computer now and I have my terminal windows open, I probably have some behind me open. Lena's like, "What, are you hacking the FBI?" I'm like, "No, that's just how you do development." Like,
yeah, in the movies, it's so easy. You just do this,
type away.
Yeah, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You can turn all the lights on and off, traffic lights. Oh, well, that's I just have to do this.
Yeah.
That's easy.
But you know what I just realized? We did it again. Look at the time. Like
we said
we said it was going to be short
10
today.
minutes instead. It's a quarter of an hour. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
It's hard to restrain ourselves because it's so much fun to talk about, but we have to stop here. We're gonna talk next whenever we get a chance. We'll get together. We'll talk about Shopify because personally I'm very excited about it. I know that a lot of people use Shopify for uh, building their stores. A lot of people are Shopify consultants and they can help other people, but there's also a huge industry for people who are building these add-ons. Personally, if I could incorporate that into my skill set, which right now I have zero for Shopify, if I could learn it, I feel like that could be something that I could do on the side, which could become bigger than that. And one day maybe that's my business, right? I love thinking about business when it comes to software because I think it just goes together so well because you are able to solve real problems, right? You're not there, you don't show up. In other jobs, I feel that you go in there and say, okay, what do you need me to do? And I'll do whatever you need me to do so I get paid. In software, I feel like we can look for things. All right, this is a problem. I'm going to solve that problem. I don't need someone to give me work. I can just create work, which is I think incredible.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, we have to stop.
Yeah. I'm sorry I did it again.
No, it's not you.
It's
It's
good.
just fun. And
Yeah.
the topics are so big too. So next time we're gonna try to make it more
Narrow it.
focused. We're gonna just talk about Shopify, and so you're gonna show us how to get started with Shopify. Would you think you can do that? Let's do that. We'll do some screen shares, and we'll do the best that we can. And hopefully, anybody who's listening right now and watching, tune in to that show and subscribe to this channel. I know that everybody says that, but don't subscribe to their channel. Subscribe to this one because they suck. This is better.
It's been great content, and I feel like you're doing more and more of these, and you keep having me back, so I highly recommend it. So
yeah,
definitely subscribe.
Where else are you gonna see Kevin Mack?
Yeah.
Okay, so come on back when you have some time. And Kevin, it was really great seeing you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. See you, everybody.